Politicians and policymakers see transit planning at one level. The public, from businesses right through to everyday riders, experience it as a more immediate matter of getting from A to B. With us for their feedback about what the province's plans could mean for getting around the provincial capital, Brian Kelcey. He's Vice President of Public Affairs at the Toronto Region Board of Trade, and Tricia Wood, Professor of Geography at York University and a representative of the transit advocacy group Code Red TO, which I should ask about. Why Code Red?
It came after Code Blue, the campaign about the waterfront.
Ah, okay. So now we're on to Code Red.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the TTC's color.
I gotcha. Can we just, let me get both of you to weigh in on this whole sort of overarching issue of how transit planning and operations are best served? By having the city continue to run it or by having it uploaded to the provincial government, which has made the argument that they can do a better job than the city has been? Tricia, if you would.
Well, Code Red TO did a major report that came out in November, and we looked at governance in lots of places. And so one of the things that we can tell you is that it's not a question of order of governance. The answer is not, well, if the city runs it, then it works. If the province runs it, then it works. It's specific to the situation. So we do have some issues to solve, but they're not necessarily solved just by relocating who owns it, who runs it, who makes the decisions.
Okay. Brian, your view?
And as you know, Steve, in 2017 and then with a follow-up paper earlier this year, the Board of Trade took the position that we want to see as much uploading as possible. And we want to see as much of a regionalized system as possible. That's not because we don't have respect for each city's role in helping to plan what happens around stations or with the transit system. It's because the primary barrier we're facing to get transit built and transit repaired in this region is money. And the province has access to it. They have growth revenues. They have a lot of debt capacity that cities don't have. And so we also know that there's a lot of transit riders out there, me among them, who have to cross city borders in an increasingly regional system. Yes, most of the riders are here in Toronto, but we need to distribute jobs. We need to distribute homes more evenly throughout the region. And that means distributing commutes out through the region. So we wanted to see, and still want to see, a predominantly provincially funded system with integrated fares across the region so that not only is the ride seamless for transit riders who want to go across the border to a job in Mississauga or Brampton or Vaughan or vice versa, but also so that we start thinking regionally in terms of how we build transit so that those areas are underserved, that have too many drivers on the roads, can start to see enough transit capacity that we can change that math.
Let me just understand your group's position a little better. If it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's the province owning it or the city owning it, what does matter?
What does matter is running it well and leaving it in the hands of the most experienced and successful agency. So in the case of Toronto, I think the TTC has a stronger case to make. And there's a difference between funding, which of course we do welcome, and ownership, right? So it isn't necessary for the province to upload all of the TTC or parts of it in terms of the subway, which is the alleged proposal, in order to fund it better. I mean, we absolutely agree that that is the major obstacle. And in terms of regional planning, yes, that's a need, and we also support that, but that also has to come from sort of the ground up. You can't impose a regional structure on top of a local structure with kind of disregard for it. It really needs to be built out.
Let me put it this way. The province, of course, has access to more money than the city does. But the way it's always been done in the past is that they just transfer the money to the city after the city's made a decision on what it wants to do. Well, what prevents that from continuing?
Well, first off, one of our primary concerns at the board is with respect to the City of Toronto in particular, and this applies to other cities, of course, as they grow. The city faces practical and legal limits on how much it can borrow. And we've had a one-third financing system in this country, and it's been modified a little bit with the last...
province, municipality.
In terms of paying for these things. And there's an upper limit, candidly, to how much cities can contribute if we keep following on with that model. With respect to ownership, one of the things right now that there's really two conversations going on between the city and the province, which is presumably why we're here. And one of those is a conversation about what happens with expanded transit, and the other is a conversation about what happens with the existing subway lines. And let's put the existing lines aside for a moment. The biggest transit expansion we have underway right now in the city limits in the City of Toronto, Finch West and Eglinton Crosstown, by far the larger of the two.
Yep.
Both are provincially owned lines. Both are provincially funded lines. The province has agreed in the case of Eglinton to let the TTC operate that line. But I'm not seeing a crowd of protesters saying it's disastrous that the province is going to actually own the line and own the
subways,
stations.
Brian.
Well, a part of the Eglinton LRT is going to be underground. And so for all intents and purposes...
Doesn't make it a subway.
And what difference does that make? Is that you still have
because the province wants the subways.
Sure, and as I said, so we've got a debate now in terms of what happens with new subway lines and what happens with existing subway lines. And if the province wants to come forward and say, for example, as they've already hinted in the lead up to this budget, that they're willing to fund a relief line, but they want control over and ownership over that asset, that is structurally
You're fine with that.
Not that different from what we're seeing with the Eglinton Cross.
Tricia.
There is a third part here, right? This isn't only about where do we find the money, this is about who makes the decisions. So this was initially presented to us as you've said, right? That the province is willing to put up money for it, but they want to own it for the particular way that they want to capitalize it. But what they've now come forward with in the last week or so with the letters from Michael Lindsay is an indication that actually, no, they also want to make decisions. They want to overturn existing decisions on the part of the city, and they want to be the ones who make the decisions about what we build.
What's wrong with that?
Well, that's a governance question, and that's not the same thing as funding. And so there's a little bit of slipperiness happening between these, as if there's the same thing, and if we upload it, there are no governance issues. There are governance issues. The Metrolinx Board of Governors or Board of Directors is not the same in terms of the way it's structured as the TTC Board of Commissioners, which has elected officials on it and has a much greater degree of accountability.
Okay, I get that, but this is going to sound strange, but governance issues aside, funding issues aside, maintenance issues aside, the only thing the people who are watching this right now or listening to it on podcast care about is who has a greater certainty of ensuring that my transit experience is better? City or province? That's essentially the question they want the answer to. What do you think the answer is?
Well, but that isn't the answer, right? Who will make this better? There's no given that says that the province, switching it will make it better or leaving it at hands will make it better. There are processes. We still have to make good decisions, whoever does it. In terms of Toronto's specific situation, disintegrating in any way the TTC is not going to make the experience better. It makes everything about its coordination more challenging. So there's not a good case for making changes if the goal is better service, including in terms of better regional service. There's nothing getting in the way of the TTC, the City of Toronto, and then its neighboring municipalities, working amongst themselves even, but ideally with the support of the province, to better coordinate transit across those boundaries.
In fact, Brian,
ownership is not required, or change of ownership is not required to do that.
That happened. That's why there's a subway that goes north of Steeles now to Vaughan, which is in York Region, which is not the 416.
And there's a couple of issues here in terms of first with respect to what outcomes you get from having the province at the table. I think it's important to say, and especially with former Mayor Miller's comments on this show elsewhere today, that we've had what I'll call panic deflation in terms of concern about where this particular government, the Ford government, is going on this relative to what's actually happening.
Panic deflation?
We would be equally concerned as a pro-transit organization if you started to see lines being drawn all over the place recklessly, and the proverbial subways to Pickering that we've heard about. In fact, what's been revealed through the letter exchange between the province and the city, so we're talking about the relief line and funding the relief line, which let's remember is the city's and the TTC's top priority right now.
And the provinces apparently too.
And the provinces apparently too, despite 100 rumors and complaints to the contrary. We're talking about funding the Yonge extension, which, whatever the issues around whether it gets built first, second, or third, is a TTC plan. I was skeptical of it, and I went door knocking late last fall, and I kept running into people saying, well, the TTC wants this because it's better able to stage trains on Yonge if they can build yards further north, which they can't do now. Scarborough is on that list as well, and obviously it's a controversial line. I've been a part of arguing that it should be a controversial line, but nevertheless, that's a line that the TTC is now planning and that all three levels of government, all three political parties at both levels of government and both mayoral candidates in the last election all support it. So we're not talking about drawing lines all over the place.
No,
we're talking about potential adjustments to a relief line based on presumably professional advice about how to build it better. And let's wait and see. If the provincial plan for the relief line is crazy, we'll say it's crazy.
Let me take Trish to Scarborough. You know, it started as an LRT, then it went to a 3-stop subway, then it went to a 1-stop subway, now it's back to a 3-stop subway. I don't know that they're any closer to actually getting a shovel in the ground and making this thing actually happen. It was going to be $2.5 billion. Now it looks like it's going to be closer to $4 billion, maybe north of $4 billion. What, is this any way to run a railroad?
So yeah, first of all, absolutely, it will be $5 billion before we're done, absolutely. All the research in terms of what we can predict given what we have and have not done in terms of a rigorous business case analysis and a rigorous planning process. We've just obviously taken steps back if we're going to change our plans now. The other thing that has completely dropped off the radar and was not on the province's list is the Eglinton East LRT, which would connect in particular to UT Scarborough. And that's a very important line, and it is a priority of the cities, and it's not on the list. And these adjustments are not small. I mean, changing whether not only how many stops the Scarborough Subway has, but where that line runs, because they're talking about extending it beyond the town center now in the second letter. That's not a small adjustment. Neither is it a small adjustment to start talking about tunneling the Eglinton West line connecting out to the airport.
Do you think the Scarborough Subway is ever going to be built?
I fear it's not, actually. I've worried about this for quite a while, that fundamentally we're going to run out of money. We have an envelope sort of, you know, set out for it. It already exceeds that, and it has crowded out any possibility of the Eglinton LRT. And what I fear is that, you know, the Scarborough RT is going to come to the end of its happy life, and people will be put on buses, and unless there's a magic tree of money somewhere, it's just not going to get built, you know, and I think alternatives kind of fill in. And that's a shame, because then Scarborough riders wind up actually with less than what they have now instead of more.
Do you think that Scarborough Subway is ever going to be built, whether it's 1 station or 3 stations or whatever?
We'll see.
Well, of course we'll see. But
what I'm trying to focus on is we've heard a lot of history. You know, a lot of people are complaining about decisions that were made in the past, and frankly, I agree with them. The board agrees with them on a lot of the mistakes that have been made. Nobody's had a perfect record on this, whether it's the TTC or Metrolinx, the province or the city. They've all made decisions that compromised on evidence-based decision-making. They've all had overruns on their projects. There's a lot of blame to go around. I am, and the board is trying to be optimistic about getting better results. And so, for example, several months ago, it was normal in the transit activist community to be saying that King Street Pilot was going to be scrapped from Queen's Park, that all of the LRTs in the west side of the city were going to be scrapped. And here we are. Hamilton is confirmed. Finch West is under construction. The mayor and the premier just made an announcement that they're proceeding with a slightly reduced version of Here Ontario's line in Mississauga.
the King Street Pilot is apparently going to potentially become permanent.
So we're trying to judge on outcomes here. And the next outcome, the next benchmark that we're getting a signal from the province from its various communications publicly and privately on is the relief line, which is the highest priority.
Let me follow up on that.
What happens after?
We've heard some pretty interesting theories out there about what the relief line and maybe some other lines might look like. We've heard about monorails. The Minister of Transportation confirmed today that's not on. We've heard about, magnetic...
Maglevs, yeah.
What's that called?
Magnetic levitation.
Yeah.
Magnetic levitation, yeah. I mean, flying trains, I don't know, whatever. What, is there a neat idea out there that we haven't heard before that you kind of like?
Oh, no. I mean, not for the relief line. I think that's very important. This is a large and significant project for which we know there would be immediately a large ridership demand. That is not where we put speculative technology that either agency has never used before, which doesn't mean that we're not open to new technology. The TTC continues to upgrade its train technology and signal technology. And I mean, the TTC has a very strong record, and I think GOES is improving as well in terms of adopting more modern technology, particularly when it's more energy efficient, as it becomes available. And we should absolutely look into, other technologies that we're not using, but you don't put them on the major line right in the middle of your system. You start a little bit smaller than that. The other part too that's a caution about introducing new technology into the middle of the system is that the TTC has existing plans for being able to run cars between different lines and storage and maintenance facilities. Introducing new technologies has ripple effects into other areas that we're currently not prepared for. The relief line also, it's not as far along in terms of planning, but it is already several years underway in terms of planning. So again, if we're starting again with some new technology, we are at least pausing and possibly taking a few steps backwards in terms of time. The other line that has come off the table in terms of the conversation is the waterfront LRT, and there are some parties, particularly concerned about it, but probably no more than the constituents who live there.
Sidewalk has said they're actually prepared to consider paying for that thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely a central component of the kind of community that they envision in that area, and it should be for all of us. The geography of that area is much more well suited to transit than it is to driving.
Brian, have you heard about a funky new design or something that we haven't heard of yet that you might like to see?
I think and I hope that what the Premier and the Minister are talking about, and there's been hints to suggest that this might be the case, is taking a new look at how we're building subways. I would be worried if we're bringing in radically new technologies and repeating history with the Scarborough RT at the time, that was very much an experimental line when it was created.
Yes.
However, the board has been vocal for a few years about the fact that everything we're hearing from members of the board who represent international engineering companies who have experience building transit in other jurisdictions is that we are falling behind tested technologies, routine technologies, proven technologies in jurisdictions like Spain, which builds subways pretty much faster than everybody else and is hardly an unsafe jurisdiction. They are they're very focused on getting transit out rather than making it as pretty as possible, and you get a result, which is the transit service and capacity that we all need when you go ahead. So what I'm hoping to see is a change in how this is being built, which means that you don't need radical changes to most of the design that's already been done in terms of routing and so forth. And if the provincial government is willing to invest to catch up for any lost time on that, and everything we're seeing and hearing suggests that they're prepared to invest staggering amounts of money to do that, then hopefully we'll get to a better result. It'd be very easy in the current political climate to be lobbying for, on the basis of principle, concerns about how we're not going to get a great result from all of this. 100 mistakes have been made before. What we can all start doing as transit advocates is to keep pushing the Ford government and City Hall, frankly, to try and get to the best possible result within the political parameters that they're already working with.
Let me pick up on that. Tricia, just in our last minute here, there is a considerable amount of opposition to this plan, not necessarily on the merits, but because the Ford government is proposing it. I know you're a geographer and not a political scientist, but can you speak to that? A lot of opposition is what you might call Ford derangement syndrome. You've got to grant that, don't you?
I mean, I think that might be part of it, certainly, but I don't think it's a derangement syndrome. I think it arises from a concern that this is one of many initiatives or proposals that's being put out there that's in some way a major policy shift that's not been preceded by rigorous public consultation, rigorous study, rigorous consultation of experts. But I would also say, this is certainly Code Red TO's concern, that it's not a unique feature of the Ford government. And we're very much aware of that. This is a long history with multiple provincial governments of all of the parties. And it really does come back to what is the relationship between the province and the city? Because we feel very strongly, actually, that a really good, rigorous conversation is needed about the funding, planning, and governance of Toronto Transit and Toronto Regional Transit. We're not persuaded yet that this is that conversation. But it's not because of the Ford government. We didn't have it with the Liberals. We didn't have it with the NDP. And it's related in some ways to Bill 5. There is a larger question about what is the relationship between the city and the province, who decides what and why, and are we going to build any kind of governance structure in which we have those conversations and make those decisions together? Well, that's not this conversation yet, but we hope we will get there.
Hopefully we've had some of that robust conversation here on TVO tonight. I want to thank the two of you for coming in and sharing your views. Tricia Wood, Professor of Geography at York University. Brian Kelcey, VP, Public Affairs, Toronto Region Board of Trade. Thanks, you two.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.